Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to be talking about workflows in NAV 2016. There has been a lot of interest in this webinar, so I don't want to take any extra time this morning. I'm just going to mention a couple of things quickly here. As usual, we are recording this webinar, so if you want to watch it again, you want somebody else in your organization to watch it, just jump onto our website later today. It's going to be on enovia.com. We'll have the recording posted for you. Also, if you have any questions, type them into that question box. I will get them called out and answered for you. So, Jeff, without further ado, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
All right, thank you, Abby. Abby, please jump in and let me know if there's any issues with my audio or my screen sharing. You should all be looking at my opening slide, NAV 2016 workflows. There's an exclamation point put there. So I will. I've got just a really quick slide deck, and then we're going to spend some time in NAV 2016 looking at workflows, and really from the standpoint of kind of more a design / consideration sort of workflows 101, what is possible in with workflows. Ideally, I think I've got planned a second workflow where we introduce some of the really fun and cool stuff, like the automated processing of documents with the OCR engine that is new to NAV 2016. So we'll talk about that stuff. We're not going to show any of that right now because I don't have that set up. But as I was preparing for this, that was something that was really exciting for, I think, a lot of our NAV interests. So what are workflows? That is a from the standpoint of what does, I guess, what do workflows mean in NAV 2016? Essentially, it's a really basic scenario. When something happens, do something. So I think that we can make sense of that. And this functionality has been in NAV for a little bit now, I believe since 2013. We've had and maybe even before that, the document approval process has relied on workflow functionality running in the background. And so with the release of 2016, Microsoft certainly listened to end users who said it really would be nice to have this functionality extended to other parts of the ERP system, and so that's what this new release means. But again, keeping in mind at a basic level, when something happens, do something. The other thing that we'll talk about a little bit here is how complicated is this to set up. I'm a math guy, so I love throwing complicated math on the screen wherever I can. It's not as complicated as this integration process here, but it does, like anything else related to ERP, require some careful, thought-out planning on the beginning, because there's a lot of things you can do with it. NAV is a platform, certainly. There's a lot of things you can do with it, but everything needs to be thought out because this is trying to replicate your business process, I guess, in certain aspects. And then ultimately, how can my organization benefit from workflows? That is going to be a different answer probably for all of you. And for some of you, it might be that, you know what, this isn't going to work. But you know, that's always the bottom line. If you are new to NAV 2016, if you are considering an upgrade, as you start to build the ROI case for why is this investment important to my organization, certainly workflows could be a part of that equation. And just kind of a high-level view, like as I like to do, not selfishly just for my own benefit, but I do like to point out some of the neat features of NAV 2016. I don't So as we're poking around in the product here and looking at workflows, I will mention some of these other interesting parts. The on Azure or in Azure on Office 365. No, I think I just reversed that. The integration, how tightly integrated Office 365 is to NAV 2016. Certainly, NAV 2016 on Azure is really great, and then the different clients that you have in 2016, the phone and tablet client, the fact that it is tied in again to CRM Online, the e-everything part, electronic invoicing, OCR, and the ability to add in third-party data sources. That's really cool. The exchange rate lookup is another thing we should be presenting on, because for those organizations that have to deal with exchange rates, this new automation is putting something into the product that, quite honestly, most people were paying to do themselves before. So for those of you that were, thank you. For the rest of us, enjoying the benefit of what I assume the fruits of your labor are. Workflow is what we're going to talk about today, and you can see on this slide from Microsoft, enable process automation and the easy customization built into with the I guess the underlying block of eventing is the piece of NAV that allows us all to work in the background. New functionality, things that certainly lots of you have requested: the posting preview, deferrals and positive pay, and then also the engineering part. So the test automation suite is available for us as partners, trying to make it easier for us to design solutions that can rapidly be deployed and then essentially drive down the total cost of ownership for the system. So I think that is my last, yes, that is my last slide. So excuse me as you stare at my son's pet cow. I should tell everyone I am from Wisconsin. It's not required that you own a car, but it is, or a cow, but it's highly recommended. So all right, so here is NAV 2016. Hopefully most of you have seen this before. I'm at the role center of the small business president, so all kinds of interesting information here. Some people may find this a little too busy. There is a fine line. I like to keep my ribbon appropriately sized so my icons are all nice and easily visible. This grouping here is getting a little bit busy for me, but ideally, the thought process behind this ribbon is that, and behind the entire role center, is that you have the information that you need readily available, but not too much. So if I'm a president, I certainly want to know about all these sales performance, finance performance. I want notifications. That's an important part of workflows, but ultimately, finding the right amount of stuff on your screen is easily configurable, and that's one of the great things about NAV. So in order to enable workflow, so I'm going to kind of start from the basic building blocks of what's required. Essentially, there's a couple things we've got to turn on and check, and one of the first things is the SMTP mail setup. So I'm a big fan of using the search bar to find things. Results in the search bar, again, I can be taken to the exact point. So search results in NAV 2016, as in earlier versions. When you type something in, it brings up two columns of results, and this SMTP, I click on this will take me right to the SMTP setup. This is where the SMTP setup lives, so if I click on the right side of a search result, I get and I'll just do that right now. So it brings me to the IT Administration Services Department, and then I can click down here to find the mail setup, which inconveniently opened on my second screen, so I will drag it back over here. And so this is one of the building blocks that needs to be turned on in order for workflows to work. There are other parts of the system that that this also is a requirement of, but I wanted to start from the beginning. So the mail setup screen is very basic. Your IT department helps you set this up. Basically just naming the server, what ports, authentication methods, and your user account. And it's as easy as that. That turns on the functionality for you to, and as we start to talk about a few of the use cases of workflows, certainly notifying someone is an important part of the workflow process, and using email is a very effective tool of doing that. You can use notifications within the NAV client, but depending on your environment, maybe you've got someone who isn't logged into NAV all day. Maybe it's a manager level that needs to approve. You certainly want to have the ability to send approval email notifications to these people, as well as maybe turning on the notifications within NAV. So as I mentioned on the earlier slide, there is a button here to apply Office 365 server settings. So when we talk about what does it mean for NAV 2016 to be tightly integrated in Office 365? It's these sorts of things that make that a benefit. Not that setting up email service within NAV was ever something that was really cumbersome, but one click and putting in the Office 365 info is the sort of stuff that that we mean when we talk about tight integration between Office 365. So first thing you got to make sure of is that you've got mail server set up, configured, and then I'll return to my role center by hitting the home button. And the next part that we're going to go to is job queues, because that's another part of getting this set up. So we are going to, this time I'm going to click on the link that will take me right to the application setup job queues, and I think I've just got two. Yeah, so this is the job queue screen. For those of you unfamiliar with it, there's some information regarding the instance where the job queue is starting on. This environment that I'm connected to today, and I should say thank you to my gracious hosts. I'm actually on site at Linko Distribution. They've loaned me an office while I'm taking part in a NAV 2016 upgrade process. So it's exciting to present on a topic like this that we're actually discussing in the conference room across the hall. But in this case, I'm connected to a virtual environment running in Azure. I'm running the full Windows client on my laptop, and so I've got these NAS instances. These machines are referencing virtual resources that are not on my local network but are out on the internet. So we just have to make sure that the default job queue is started. There are certain settings that you may or may not want to that you may or may not need to configure prior to this. In most cases, you're running the job queue and it's starting automatically anytime NAV fires up, but certainly you want to verify that's another part, because some of what you're able to accomplish in workflows is done by relies on job queues running. So you get job queues set up, you get your email set up, and then last but not least, you're going to set up the users, because in most of what we're talking about in workflows, it's going to be passing on the responsibility in the business process, defining what the business process, who owns which step, and then assigning those roles. So we are going to search approval user, and let's see here. We can go to document approval, or we're going to go to the more general workflow. And let's just take a look at this screen. Sorry, it keeps opening on my second monitor. So this is a sample of what the approval user setup. Obviously, this is pretty basic for our demo environment, but you'll notice a few things about this approval user setup list. We've got the user IDs for the users who are in the system. As you can see, I've got Abby in here. I'm down here. Abby is my approver. Tom and James are down here. Tom has, and isn't it just coincidence that I've given my boss unlimited sales approval and purchase approvals. Request amount I don't have unlimited for him, but he's not answering to anyone, and he can approve anything. James has to be anything that James does needs to be approved by Tom, and so you can see here that we can set different limits based on the user. This is all stock NAV out of the box. Some of workflow, when it gets to specific business processes where it's a robust solution, there's certainly the opportunity to make it even better and more tightly aligned with your process by adding custom code to it. So part of this and everything I'm going to show you today is stock. Part of maybe what workflow really, when workflow really starts to make sense, it may require some customization, but it may not. So out of the box, you can define users with different sales approval amounts, different purchase approval amounts, request amounts, and there are some in the approval setup. You can define emails for the users. You can list substitutes. So in the case here, Abby is my substitute. It doesn't really make sense for me to have her as my approver and my substitute, but I'm just going to show you as we generate some of these. There's a test button up here that kind of shows just a very basic logic test if you've got stuff set up right, and so, pretty straightforward. I think this part is certainly very easy to understand. It may be that you have certain users that all have the same amount, and then a manager has an amount over that. It might be that you want to have all your users, if they are releasing a sales order or converting a quote to an order, that there's a limit. It's okay for them to deal with stuff that's under $1,000 or $5,000, but when something happens above $5,000, you want there to be a credit limit check. You want to put a bunch of checks in your process so that you're sure that demand doesn't get created within your system, that you're starting to order parts for creating jobs and then determining afterwards, like, what, this customer doesn't always follow through on their word, and here we are with extra supplies, labor, etc. So the different scenarios as far as how you would use workflow probably depend on the department that you're working in. If it's purchasing, again, the same sort of limits apply. So I'm going to, you see there's a nice little approval user setup test button here with notifications set up, and we'll just click on this to basically, I don't know why you'd want anything other than instantly, but maybe it's a performance thing. Maybe you want to, because you've got shift work, maybe you want to delay notifications so that they arrive just as your users are signing in for the next shift. But basically, there's a notification template code, and what type of notification do you want? Most cases, you're just going to create a new notification record, and you want that to happen instantly. But the real fun begins when you use the approval user setup test. So I'm going to click on that. All right, and brings me to the so we're going to take basically. What we're going to do is just pick, and let's actually pick me, because I think I've really screwed my account up. So I'm testing for this user ID, and I want to test sales approval setup. So let's say that I am a customer service rep and I'm talking to customers on the phone and asking them about what and releasing orders, etc. So I'm going to click the preview button, and it is going to generate a result telling me what's going on when I ask for an approval. And then this is, I guess my point here is to show you kind of what's going on. So basically, you can see that there's an error, one of the few errors in my life that I've actually designed and have planned for. But basically, in a sales requirement, when I request a sales amount or a release of sales, that approval request is going to go to Abby. And if we look back on this chart, I've got a $100 limit. Abby's got a $1,000 limit. And then there's Alan, and he doesn't have unlimited, but he doesn't have any limits defined. So, and to further complicate things, Alan gets approved by Ben. Now Ben does have some $5,000 limit, so that makes sense. But if we go through the logic of this and the testing, I send an approval request that goes to Abby when it's above $100. Abby's got a $1,000 request, and that goes to Alan, but my logic breaks down because Alan doesn't have a $1,000 request. It does get passed on to Ben, but certainly you don't want to have someone downstream or up the chain of command who has a lower sales amount approval limit than the previous user. So there's some really basic checking when you do that. Let me see if I check someone else. So let's check James. Now, if we look here, James's approver is Tom, and let's see, do I have a limit defined? And no, James doesn't have anything defined for him. So anytime James wants to do anything, maybe he's a new guy, and we want to do that. We want to set him up so that he needs to be checking every time he does something for the first 30 days or some probationary period. So he's got 0 approved, but he goes to Tom, and Tom has unlimited approval. So as long as Tom says it's okay, everything is great. So as you can see, as I said, this is all stock NAV. So these sorts of decisions at the time of implementation, when you're putting workflows in, if you're working with a partner, they would help you identify, you would let them know what the appropriate numbers are and the chain of command, etc. You would set up your users. All of these people have to be NAV users, certainly, but once they are set up as users with the limits in there, you can do all of this stuff. You can set up the users yourself as a NAV user with rights within your own system. All of this could be set up. So sort of some of the nice little features about just real basic setup tests, because as you can see, when I start to send stuff as my user account, this is just on a single sales approval. There's a lot going on in the system. It's pinging from me to Abby, Abby to Alan, Alan to Ben, and then back to me. So you can make it that complicated. Certainly, that gives you the ability to look at a bunch of different scenarios, but in a lot of cases, most people find value in just a very simple process of a sales document approval. So the most basic workflow is a pairing of a single event with a single response, and I guess I'll just take a minute here before we dive back into workflows, and I'll just go to the workflow department within the application. Yeah, so here we are in the application setup section, and these are all the setup configurations and lists, tasks associated with workflows. So, in general, what is possible when you have those basic building blocks configured within your system. You've got mail, job queues running, and you've got users set up appropriately. Microsoft sees this as giving you the ability to model real-life business process or maybe best practices within the software. So examples, I guess, when I think back of stuff that we show in our demos, possibilities, things like ensuring a customer's credit limit has been independently verified, or require a two-person approval for significant vendor payments. So these workflows basically focus on three main building blocks and processes, and they're going to be, in most cases, comprised of steps, which are approvals, notifications, and process automation. So from an approval standpoint, these three building blocks, first I'll speak a little bit about approvals. Approvals will leave a work task, item, or document in a blocked or unapproved state until it's approved by a suitable person. So that's, I think, pretty easy. But that functionality obviously needed to be built into the code. So an approval is no, this order isn't ready for release. No, you can't raise this customer's credit limit unless you do steps X, Y, and Z, things like that. Then notifications tell users that something has happened, so that's the second part of workflows, that you're going to tell users that something's happened and or that they need to take some kind of action. Again, these notifications can happen within the system with the notification block, or they can be emailed outside of the system telling people they need to come back and look at this. And then last but not least, and certainly most complex, is the process automation piece of this. So the ability to execute a process routine and have NAV calculate something or perform an action. And that's obviously the reason that we need the job queue fired up. So along with approval, notification, and process automation, workflows in events react to real parameters in your business. So it's setting up these parameters that and as you start to think about how could we use this within our organization, it's kind of those things that should be in the back of your mind. How, what are the triggers that we need to get this to work? And excuse me, I just jinxed myself by give me 1 second. In my zest to start this, I failed to plug in my laptop, and it's about to die. So Abby, if you know how to tap dance, this would be an excellent time to do that.
The good news,
but
Jeff,
actually, never mind.
we are all ready for you to continue. Don't you fret.
Okay. All right, super, great. Okay, so I'm back and I am powered up. So, okay, so the parameters I was talking about, determining the parameters within your business that make sense for these sorts of processes. You can have individuals. You can have the purchasing team can talk about their own process flow independently of the sales team or the CSRs. And that's sort of the way, I guess, that we really see this adding value, because this is such a big functional piece of NAV. Certainly that was addressed prior to the release of workflows in NAV 2016 by the ISV market, and because it was something that people demanded enough. There are ISVs that have been doing this in NAV for years, but it's an extra expense of another piece of software running within the system. Some of them ran within NAV, some ran outside of NAV. The expense check process has been something that we've written a lot of stuff to ourselves. So figuring out individual pieces within your organization where this makes sense, where it can have the biggest impact, is sort of what our best practice, I think, has developed around. So workflows can be triggered by credit limits, geographies, totals, individual owners, or any one of hundreds of other potential conditions. And I will show you a little bit of the behind the scenes there in terms of just what comes out of the box. Preloaded, there's going to be, if we look at the workflow template section, again, this is base NAV. There are 6 different departments. on the most basic, this almost seems kind of cyclical or ironic, but you can set up a workflow to alert yourself for overdue approval requests, and that were generated by other workflows. So there's administration in the finance. There is, let me just expand this column, a general journal batch approval workflow and a general journal line approval workflow. So let's just view that one. Grab that up onto the screen, and this is going to, I guess this, now we are jumping into the meat of what approvals or what workflows start to look like within NAV, and this is all base NAV, pristine Chronos, not ruined by me yet in any sort of way. But basically, if you look, the definition, there are workflow steps here that we've defined based on a journal batch approval. So let me grab this. So you want an approval of a general journal that is requested, then these are, you can define the conditions. If we click on these ellipses, it will tell us, okay, so we can define what template we want. Is this recurring or a one-time? You can, the business process part of automating workflows is addressed here. But essentially, you're saying that once a journal batch is run and you need an approval on it, what do you do? So you know, there's, let me see if I can make even a little more room. So, all right. So first, you know, the first thing, we certainly want to make sure that the journal batch is balanced. If the journal batch is balanced, then always, and you can add a record restriction here. What would you want to do if the journal, you can, so this is a little bit of logic that is there. Like, you're not going to want to even request an approval on a batch that's not balanced. So if it's not balanced, or if it is balanced, then you can create an approval request, and then create both a record and a notification for that. And then once the approval request is approved, remove the record restriction. So then the batch, you would change the state of the journal batch, saying that it is approved. If it's rejected, then again send another record and request, and down the line all the way to you know, when it's not balanced, it's just you send this message, and all of these things are, you know, completely customizable by you. So depending on how often you want to be in here, how large and complex your organization is, you can, you know, if there is, if let's say Carrie is the person at your organization that is responsible for approving these, or is responsible for fixing errors on imbalanced journals, you can put that sort of information in these messages, like instead of the selected journal batch is not balanced and cannot be sent for approval, after that could be call Carrie or contact accounting or whatever it is. So this is all stuff that you don't need developer rights to do. These are all configurations rather than code changes that give you this sort of functionality. So there's a couple finance, and these are certainly just the basic soup starter, to coin one of Tom's terms, soup starter of what this could mean. The 20 that come in here are that come preloaded, I should say, are really quite basic, but again, the functionality being built into the product is really an important step, I think, for NAV as it in the competitive market space, and you know, to give people what they want out of an ERP system, it needed to be there. So it's so Microsoft has included some, just like they include basic role centers. Certainly, our belief is that if you use the product and you're getting the most out of it, you should be taking advantage of the fact that it is customizable and configurable, because that is part of what you're paying for when you buy and invest in Dynamics NAV. If you didn't need customization, you could probably do a lot of this stuff in in something like QuickBooks or a less expensive ERP package. So the integration stuff, and like I said, this is today is kind of workflows 101. So the workflows 102 or workflows 201, I'll be showing some OCR document approval. That is when this starts to really become cool, and depending on your sense of confidence in your system, really becomes scary, because taking a purchase order, a purchase invoice, scanning it into your system, and having it fill out the appropriate fields, relying on the OCR technology to populate things right, is really cool. And for a lot of people at the that spend a lot of their day entering this sort of data, this is going to be a game changer for them. Microsoft has invested in the Lexmark OCR engine to do this, and we've been playing with it, and it does take some tweaking, but it is really cool stuff. So stuff like these incoming document OCR workflows. Let me just jump into one of those as a basic condition, and basically there's this is I guess even more basic than I thought it was, but creating an OCR that is a purchase invoice from an incoming document. Did the OCR document create successfully? Yes. If it didn't, then you better notify someone. Let's see if we can incoming document approval. So so here we've got an incoming document. What is it? What type of document is it? Who do you want to send it to for approval? You start to again define these different variables here, so that and then the workflow responses in a fast tab over here. What do you or a fact box, I should say. What do you want to do? And again, you can choose what shows up on here, or if this shows up, and if this is valuable or not. But so it's these I guess this is a good spattering of what's the purchase department, sales and marketing, and sales documents, I think, are probably where most people are going to see the greatest value. Out of the box, NAV 2016 supports sales document and document approval workflows that enable users to submit sales documents and customer verification for approval according to a predefined hierarchy of approval managers. The approvals can be done with accounting managers or another similar significant role in your company. In this way, you can have workflows that need approval when sales discounts exceed a limit and need approval by sales managers, or you can have notifications sent to account managers when new customers are created, maybe in particular if your sales reps are have territory based on geography. That filter can be added in here, a new customer inquiry in this geographic zone. Workflow is send an email notification with a link to the customer record to that sales rep A. If you have your business defined or your customers defined in different types like small, medium, and large, maybe you've got different account reps that handle those. So a customer inquiry, a request for credit limit, change, all of those sorts of things can make your sales force even more efficient. And then looking at the purchase side, and I guess a little bit about integration, the 2016 with OCR services, purchase workflows, that stuff just all goes hand in hand. So taking external invoices, receiving them, processing them, and generating payment lines, that's stuff that can all be done in workflows, and it can all be done out of the box with just some time spent focusing on the setup and making sure that things flow as so at any stage in these workflows. I guess that's an important thing to understand, is that at any point, because we've got massive some of these workflows that we have been playing with can get to 12, 15, I guess certainly they could be above and beyond that. The conditions and the responses at any point, it's important to understand that at any point in the process, anyone can jump in and take over and say, you know what, like this customer is unhappy, it needs an order shipped right away. We don't want to wait for 3 different departments to say, yes, we have inventory, yes, it's okay to exceed their credit limit because we sent them bad product and we want to make them happy. At any point, approvals don't remove your ability to handle these systems or these processes manually. The thought process is, so you can always manage the exceptions as you always have done. The thought process is that by putting some time in at the time you're implementing workflows, that you would automate and take a lot of this off of people's day-to-day plates, so that when things happen, like like an unhappy customer, your people have the ability to increase the level of customer service and deal with those exceptions. So don't think that, well, yeah, that's great, but we've got people that make mistakes like every organization does, and I'm worried about putting all this automated process in place. I don't want payment lines created on purchase orders until and so you can completely control that all manually, and don't think that this prevents you from doing that. And then another nice feature is that it has the ability, you have the ability to create, and actually let me escape from the templates and just, so you can set up workflow user groups, and as you can see here, Alan's been jumping in my demo. So we've got a couple groups defined here. I don't know that I've got any in mind, so let me just edit it. And so it says, oh, here we go, I do have some. So being able to assign workflows to groups of people rather than always having to assign individuals is certainly a nice functionality that Microsoft picked up from some of the other ISVs that were providing this functionality prior to it being included in the product. You've got a team of CSRs. You don't know who's working which day or which shift if you're a multi-shift business, so being able to use workflow user groups rather than individual members is a nice touch. Let's see, workflow categories we've looked at. So Alan again is in here. You can create your own categories to help you. Maybe your organization isn't set up with such clear-cut boundaries as purchasing. Maybe your purchasing people are also do some CSR stuff. So you can define these categories as you see fit and create your own. Get rid of the pre-configured ones and put your workflows into groups as it makes sense for your organization. Let's look at let's see here. Let's look at the dynamic request page inquiry. So we start to build. Essentially, what's going on in the background is that there is the functionality of an event when something happens within NAV. So that eventing, as it's referred to in the developer space, means that that the system recognizes when things are happening more so than just pure data driven. There's a time sensitive issue, and it's relating this event to a process. And basically what's going on is you're attaching events that can kick off fields or that are related to fields. You can in these events you can subscribe to these events, so that essentially when something happens, people that are events, pages, files that are subscribed to that then know when there's a change made to a particular type of record, and then kicks off further events down the line in a hierarchical fashion. And the event and workflow events are two distinct new pieces of the NAV underlying structure that the code is based on. Events allow the system to write code which will be called when this event occurs, and that process is actually, I guess, what is defined as subscribing to an event. Workflow events typically use platform events as their trigger, but it's, they've got a little bit more than just a very basic platform events. These events are registered, and I guess I'm already getting too far down the developer path, but these, the background is there to really allow this to scale. As it is, I guess as this, how does, one of the questions that I get from customers is, how is this? We have, at Innovia, we have sold a Gillies as a workflow product, and have lots of end users that really love it. How does the built-in stuff in 2016 compare to that? And certainly, it's not as robust a solution. It is as robust in a background sense. It's got all the functionality there to do that. What you get different, and maybe what you get for the extra money you're paying in some of the ISVs like a Gillies, is that it's a little bit more intuitive, easy interface. Let me just see if I can, so as we start to define all of these field and table relations, even though that doesn't require a developer, it certainly requires someone who is very familiar with NAV and with the appropriate results. And so here I'm going to go, there's a workflow event hierarchy definition. When I showed that that complicated measure of it's this sort of thing that all of these events need to be defined and need to be allowed. There's a preceding event, and essentially this, without the purchase invoice, you want to make sure that events that you create them with the idea of a hierarchy in mind, so that you don't get the system jumbled up in, if I want to create a journal line, first of all, I have to verify that the document that's generating this line has to be successfully received by the system. And so some of this stuff, I guess certainly my recommendation is that you talk to a partner, or at the very least spend a lot of time within your organization talking about mapping process within your organization, so you understand how you're doing it now, and then taking that to the next step. This is what we want to do with it, and understanding the logic there and where verification needs to happen at every state. And so you start to create these very complicated lists of event hierarchies that really start with a sort of a basic premise, going back to the when something happens, do something premise. So approval requests, all of these things, defining how they are related to others and when is it okay, is an important part of that, and that's why I think that it's important to spend a lot of time thinking this through and working with people who are familiar with this environment to help you get the most out of it. When you look at some of the ISV models, they make it really with a graphical user interface. There's typically it's a more intuitive design and creation process for the workflow. You can certainly replicate that, and there really isn't much of anything that I can think of that could be done in an ISV that you can't do in a in this workflow setup with NAV. Some of it may require a little bit of coding by a developer, but there isn't anything that is substantially different in capability. It's a matter of how easy and intuitive is it. Let me see if there's any. Yeah, this is another similar. So getting to the these setup screens and ultimately table relations. Yeah, so we've got all of this is defined, so it's very the transparency within the system of NAV is no different in this part than anywhere else. Very very clear. Let me go to some approval entries maybe just to show. All right, and that, let's see here. So I've got some overdue approval entries from and this is just like if we want to go back to, I think this is actually coming up on 10 minutes left, so I better wrap it up quickly. But so if we look at the approval entry screen, there is, and I'll look at the approval request entry, which is almost the same list. So I've got here on, looks like a sales quote. I was requesting to release a sales quote 1002 and 1013. So let me just look. So it looks like if we look at the approval request entries associated with that, this time we're going to go to work at it. So I have, actually it's not where I want to be. You go to workflows and just look at which ones are approved. Okay, so the quote approval process, let's look at that. Okay, so basically, if we look at sales quotes, this one is enabled, but in order to get a quote approved, I don't need anything because I've got no approval amount defined on there. But if I look at this one where there's a sales approval required, if I go back to my approval user list, it starts to become defined by, let's see here. So we go back to, if I'm going to release a sales order, and I've only got a $100 limit, and then it goes, remember in that process of Abby to Alan to Ben, if we go back to the entries, you'll see that for a quote, I'm able to approve 2 quotes very easily all by myself, but if there's a sales order that I want to release, and I'm assuming that this one is over my $100 limit with, yes it is, it's $1,140, that a single request for approval gets generated 4 different approval requests because they bounce back. So as we get to, let me just get to an open sales order that isn't approved, so we will we'll open this one up. And the approval process, whether it's a batch journal, a sales order, regardless of what it is, the approval button will show up on the ribbon wherever it's appropriate. So just give my system here a minute. Or 2 minutes. Oh, and of course I was impatient, so I clicked and launched about 3 of these, but let me drag it back. So as I said, oh, look at how horrible this ribbon looks. Okay, that's better. Basically, this is an open sales order. The amount of this one, it's only 1 item for $20. So I think if I want to release this order, no. So it tells me even though it's above my or below my limit, but I can just send an approval request with this button, and that will start the process. Confirms that it has been sent. Now let me just see if I refresh this. It is going to check back in with. Well, it appears that my hosted environment is starting to die. So basically, I guess the getting back to the slide about what is workflows, when something happens, do something. It's this very basic approval process that started in NAV 2013 and was then extended into just about every other area of the application. So this was just kind of a basic to get you thinking about maybe how this could help, what sort of events and processes within your own organization could aid, could be you could pick up some efficiencies where this functionality was enabled. The fact is that if you're current on your maintenance, whether you're on NAV 2016 or just getting there, you're going to have the ability to do this. So the earlier you start to think about it, the better. And as I said, I think in our subsequent ones on workflows, we're going to show the OCR, and that's really sort of the automation part of the process where people really see value and get excited about it. So. Abby, do we have any questions, or do you want to open up, unmute people for questions?
We do have a couple of questions here, Jeff. The first one is, how much of implementing workflows has to be done by a developer?
Okay. Well, let's see. Almost none of it, as it depends. As I showed the basic predefined templates, all of the table relations and field relations can all be configured, assuming that the user has appropriate permissions from a security standpoint within their organization. All of that stuff can be done without a developer. Things that require developers, when you start to reach out to custom fields or want to create events for parts of the system that aren't defined yet. I don't have any examples of that because everything that we've needed to do, we've been able to configure with the client. So my answer is almost none of it needs to be done by developers.
Okay, great. And our other question, is there any additional cost associated with the licensing?
Oh, no, okay. So as as Microsoft has moved to the perpetual licensing, I guess you do need the extended pack along with the starter pack, but the base NAV licensing covers all of this, so there's no extra cost to it. The only cost would be in terms of the time and energy it takes you to implement within your organization in a way that makes it beneficial. So it's a great thing to for those of you that have a test environment or a development environment. It's a great thing to turn on and to kick the tires on, because it doesn't place a substantial load on the system from a performance standpoint, and it kind of lets you imagine what it could be like and see and show you then also sometimes, because with the ability of workflows to maybe control a process better, it's also important to understand how that affects your users in terms of their day-to-day operations, but it's a really great. Some parts of NAV aren't really easy to implement. Turning on locations and warehousing and using production if you haven't used it before, those sorts of things are really big, monstrous, difficult things to try. Workflow is something that I think has the ability to really create efficiency within organizations, but it's easy to kind of test drive within NAV. So no cost at all to anything that I've showed today.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, that is the end of our questions. I just want to remind everybody that our recording of this webinar will be on our website by this afternoon. That is enovia.com. And Jeff, thank you so much for that great presentation. I know that so many people were interested in finding out about workflows in the new NAV, and I think we've got a real good base underneath us now.
All right. With that, I will shut it down, and thanks everyone for attending. Follow up through Abby or the emails that come as follow up to this event if you've got questions of me or have a specific question that wasn't addressed here today.